Hello again folks, welcome to the second observation analysis screencast, and for this edition we are going to be discussing fitness components and how to start devising your training plan. So just as a recap, in the previous screencasts, so remember you should have done that one first before this one, we were discussing skills tactics. In this screencast we're now looking at the last part of that section, which is fitness components, and therefore the three questions that the examiner or the person who's interviewing you will ask you are as follows. So, can you identify the strengths and weaknesses of any skills in the performance that you've seen? So we discussed that last time. The second question they will ask is, can you identify any strengths or weaknesses of any tactics in the performance that you've seen? So again, we covered that last screencast. And today's screencast will cover the final question of those three, which is, can you identify any strengths or weaknesses of any fitness components in the performance that you've seen? Just to remind you, you are looking at one performer across 5 to 10 minutes of their performance to analyse. So you're looking at one person and their specific fitness components. Now when we talk about fitness components, we're talking about two things. We're talking about physical fitness components such as power, strength, muscular endurance, so that's repeated use of the muscles for a long period of time, speed, flexibility, and aerobic endurance, which can also be carried out as cardiovascular endurance. So we're looking at the aerobic system and how people use that system in terms of endurance levels. And we can also look at skill-related fitness components, which are agility, the ability to change direction quickly, coordination, the ability to do multiple things at the same time, or to process those thoughts at the same time, reaction time, how quickly can they react to something, and balance. And if we talk about balance, we also need to be aware of the fact there are static, which is still balances if you like, and dynamic, which is balances whilst moving. Now what you need to do is pick three strengths of the performance that you have seen in terms of their fitness components. For example, I might say, okay, I watched the performance in football and their power was excellent, their strength was very good, and their muscular endurance was very good. So I've got my three strengths. I also need to pick three weaknesses. So I could say, well actually their coordination wasn't very good, their reaction time was poor, and their aerobic endurance was poor. Now once you've got your three strengths and three weaknesses, you need to ask yourself these key questions of each one. First of all, where? Where did you see that? Where was their strength particularly good? Okay, their strength was good in football because I saw them hold off a defender in the game and they maintained control of the ball whilst holding that player off. Their agility was brilliant. They dribbled past 3 players down the line, so they moved in and out very quickly. Their coordination was excellent. They managed to perform an excellent cartwheel on the balance beam, so they're coordinating their limbs really well. So first of all, where? Where was it shown? Second thing, when was it shown? And what I mean by that is what part of the performance. So if we go back to our strength example, so yeah, it was great strength when holding a player off. Well, where? Well, actually, you need a good strength in the quadricep muscles. And you can be more specific if you know those for AMP, and also in the upper body, because it was those muscles that were active to keep the ball shielded away from the defender. If we go back to the gymnastics example, yes, there was great coordination within that performance as she did that cartwheel, and she needed to coordinate her arms and her legs in order to create a successful, skillful performance. So what part of the performance? When? And then why, you need to ask yourself of each of those things. Why is that component important to that performance? Well, without good coordination, that gymnast wouldn't be able to even propose or even perform that cartwheel successfully. Without strength, that footballer wouldn't have been able to hold off that defender, and therefore that team would have lost possession, he would have lost the ball. Okay, so you're analysing those strengths and weaknesses. Just to recap, you need 3 strengths to analyse of fitness components and 3 weaknesses of fitness components at least. Okay, you can talk about more if you see more, but that's the minimum we advise you discuss from the performance that you will see. Now, once you've finished that initial section of talking about strengths and weaknesses of different things, skills, tactics and fitness, you then need to talk about what we call the training plan, or sometimes known as the action plan. And how you do this is, first of all, you look at all the skills, tactics and fitness that you've analysed. So you look at all the 3 strengths of skills, 3 strengths of tactics, 3 strengths of fitnesses, and then look at the 3 weaknesses of fitnesses components, 3 weaknesses of tactics, 3 weaknesses of skills. And you think to yourself, which is the biggest weakness? Which impacts the most upon performance? So you might have had weaknesses such as they weren't very strong, they were poor at one-to-one defending, and they didn't have very good coordination, plus they were a poor header. So the actual skill of heading was very, very poor. Well, that would suggest to me that coordination might be their biggest weakness. Or you could argue that strength might be the biggest weakness, because you need that in order to jump for the headers and to do lots in the game. So you need to think about the biggest weakness that impacts the most upon that performance. And once you've done that, you're then going to create a training program to improve that weakness. And how you do that is as follows. Obviously, we've identified our biggest weakness. First thing you need to think about is, how long would you need to improve that weakness? Now, as a golden rule, I always advise students to do one of the following things. Work towards either a skill, because most of you have had experience of practicing certain skills, so you'll have had some experience of doing some drills, or work towards a fitness component, because the components to improve fitness, again, you might have had some experience of improving your own aerobic endurance, for example, or your own strength. Tactics is a little bit more difficult to discuss, and you need a bit more broader knowledge. If you're going to pick skills, generally speaking, we talk about 3 weeks and above to improve a skill. So if we were talking about passing a netball, how long would you need to improve that? Well, you would say, well, at least 3 weeks of training to improve that skill of passing, to show some sort of difference. If we're talking about a fitness component, to improve strength, for example, you may need at least 6 weeks to see an improvement in someone's strength. So they're the numbers that you need. So think about weeks. If it's a skill, generally speaking, 3 weeks and above. Fitness component, at least 6 weeks, regardless of the fitness component. Once you've done that, you need to talk about specific coaching practices. Alright, you've said you're going to do 3 weeks of training. Well, what's included in your training? How are you going to run it? You need to break it down. What will you do to improve that weakness? And things you need to think about are as follows, usually the fit and sport principles. Time. How long is each session going to be? How many sessions are you going to have a week? Intensity. How hard do you want them to train? Do you want them to perform specific reps and sets using certain weight? You need to be very specific with that. Frequency. How many times a week are they going to train? Is this including their own training for their club? And are you just tagging on a session? You need to talk about that. The type of training used. If we're doing an aerobic endurance session, are we going to do some fartlek training? Are we going to do some continuous training? Are we going to use some interval training? Or are we just going to use specific drills to improve our skills? Progression. How across the 3 weeks am I going to make that harder so they can show that they are getting better? And ultimately, with progression, you also need to show at some point how you can relate that skill back to the game. So maybe in the last week you need to think about, well, actually I need to relate that to the game. So I need to start bringing in some defenders. I need to make it a little bit harder. And that relates to overload, making things harder on purpose so we adapt to them. If we're talking about weights, you need to increase the weight specifically to make changes, but not too much so we're going to injure someone, so do it gradually. The last thing you need to discuss is reversibility. Are you going to give them any rest periods? So for example, are they only working 3 sessions a week? If so, why? Well, they need a couple of days off to recover their muscle groups or recover their mental and physical capability so they can perform as well again. So if we talk about a couple of skills, there's some skills for examples here. So if I was improving an individual's long passing in football, could be session 1, we start with the basics of technique. So we could do a couple of drills. The session will last 20 minutes as well as their usual training program. So they might train already 3 times a week, and I'm going to give them an extra 20-minute session for week 1. And we'll be in pairs and we'll just practice some long passing together. Okay. Session 2, I might extend the distance, so I'm progressing it. Okay. I might also put a specific target involved, so they're progressing that technique and hopefully they should be getting better. I might also record the results to see if they are getting better. Session 3, well actually let's put a defender in there. Alright, can I lift the ball over a defender, make it a little bit more realistic to the game while still being accurate? If I wanted a session 4, I could start to put that into a game situation where there could be some crossing and finishing involved or something like that. So you need to think about how that's progressed, how it's developed. If the skill is different, if it's tennis, let's say, and we're working on the backhand drive, double-handed backhand, could be again, how long is my session? Well, I might start week 1, I might do 20 minutes on top of their usual training. Week 2 might expand that to 30 minutes. Week 3 might go up to an hour. The intensity, well actually, first 2 weeks we're going to keep it quite light. They're just going to be practicing basic technique and getting their grip and their stance correct. Type of training used, well actually we're going to use massed practice. We can talk about massed practice from acquisition of skills. So they're just going to be repeatedly practicing that skill. Or we could use distributed practice, so they could practice for a little bit, 10 minutes, have a break, we can talk about some feedback, how they're getting on, and have another go. Progression, how can I make that harder? Well, week 2 we can get someone serving down the backhand side and the performer can backhand back. Okay, so I can adapt my practices. If we then talked about gymnastics, for example, we might talk about the skill of a cartwheel. So it could be that week 1 could be just practicing basic cartwheel technique on mats. Week 2 we could get them elevated and perhaps a longer mat. We could build up some mats so it's a bit of height. Week 3 we could get them on a wide beam, etc. So I'm showing progression in terms of how difficult I'm making it for them. And those are the things you need to think about the most when talking about coaching practices. The last part of the training program is what we call coaching points. You need to explain to the person you're talking to, the interviewer, what the technique is supposed to look like. And you need to explain at least 4 coaching points. For example, if one of my weaknesses for an individual is the skill of getting out of the blocks in sprinting, okay, I need some coaching points for that because I need to know what I'm looking for in order for them to improve. So it could be, right, I need to make sure my hands and feet are in a set position before I start. So looking at their body position to start. Second thing is, as they start to anticipate the gun or the set mark, they'll raise their body up and be prepared to push off. That's coaching point 2. Coaching point 3. As the gun goes off, they start to push hard with their quadriceps muscles, so you should see an explosive push off. And coaching point 4, I don't want them to raise their body upright completely for the first 10 meters. I want them to remain low and a low drive for the first 10 meters to keep acceleration. So I've got 4 coaching points there that I'm looking for to improve that starting block position. If we chose something else, if you were doing a weight training program to improve strength or something else, you can pick specific exercises. For example, one of my weight training exercises might be a squat. To perform a squat, I would advise coaching point number 1 is to try and keep a straight back. Coaching point number 2, I'll be looking for the performer to keep their head up as they go down into the squat. Point 3, I can use my arms out for balance or use my arms to rest the weight upon on my shoulders. Point 4, as I go down, I'm looking for my hips and knees to be almost at 90 degrees before I'll return up to the squat position. Okay, so I'm looking for coaching points to explain what I'm doing. Without the coaching points, you will lose marks. So once you've got those things, you then should put it down into a sheet. And what I would suggest is you copy this sort of format down onto a piece of paper, and you can start to think about it when you're analysing things. And this is what it should look like. So we've got everything that I've just spoken about into a chart format, and you can pause and rewind this and read it in at your own leisure. Within the specific coaching practices, I've only done 2 weeks just to show you what it would look like, but remember, you'll be talking about these. You don't want to be writing too much down, because you've also only got one side of A4 to write your training program on. So don't kill yourself with writing, just notes, so you can develop it in your discussion. Same with the coaching points. You've noticed it's 3 weeks because it's a skill of shooting in football, but if it was improving strength in football, it could be 6 weeks. Therefore, at the end of this screencast, the checklist is as follows. We should have done these things. First of all, you should be able to comfortably watch a performer in your chosen sport. Remember, you're just watching one. You've identified 3 strengths of skills and 3 weaknesses of skills for the performance that you've seen. We did that last time. You've also identified 3 strengths of tactics and 3 weaknesses of tactics for your performer. Again, we did that last time. And from this screencast, you'll now be able to identify 3 strengths of fitness components, 3 weaknesses of fitness components for the performance that you've seen, as well as identify the biggest weakness and create an action plan to improve that weakness, covering duration, specific coaching drills and coaching points. As per usual, go over the screencast, make sure you understand it, and come back to us with any specific questions.